What about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus? What archaeological evidence do we have for this? Well, crucifixion is well known throughout the ancient sources, but in particular, we have material evidence for this. One such evidence comes from an ancient man who was crucified in the 1st century AD, and inside of his burial materials, there was found 5-inch nails that were pierced through the ankles and the wrists of the individual. So this fits with what we have always thought regarding crucifixion. So many people were crucified, but here we actually have a burial victim that has the nails still in the ankles and the wrists. The Romans knew that if you punctured through the hands, that it would just tear through the fleshy material of the hand. So they actually punctured it in a place where there weren't a lot of veins in the wrist to pin that person as long as possible without letting them bleed out. And this is precisely what we see in this particular burial. Furthermore, the reaction to crucifixion was considered to be shameful and deplorable. In the words of Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, the Greeks think this is moronic and foolishness, and the Jews believe it's a scandal. He says, but to us we preach Christ crucified, the power and the wisdom of God. But was that view the case in the 1st century? That people believing in a crucified Messiah, a crucified God, would that have been a stumbling block to the 1st century world? Well, absolutely it would. There is a graffito that was found in the Palatine Hills that was carved into plaster. And you can see this on the left, that someone had carved some graffiti into this piece of plaster. On the right, an artist tried to reconstruct what was being described there. What is being described there? Well, we see that a man is lifting his hand up to someone on a cross, but what's really odd is that the head of the person on the cross doesn't look like a human head. Instead, it looks like a donkey's head. And beneath this inscription at the very top, where it has a donkey's head of a man and somebody worshiping this individual, we read this: Alexamenos worships his God. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. Why would they create this graffito of a man worshiping a crucifixion victim with an ass's head, a donkey's head? This concept that you would worship a crucifixion victim was so utterly foolish and deplorable. It's like you're worshiping a donkey. That's your God. Alexamenos worships his God. That's how deplorable this was considered. Of course, according to Paul, the power and the wisdom of God is revealed through the cross, that God became weak so that he could become strong and bring us into heaven. This is the heart of Jesus' love and his message of forgiveness. And yet to a Greek thinker, this was just thought to be absolutely absurd. A married bachelor, only worse because it's embarrassing that you'd believe in a crucifixion victim. Moreover, there is what's called the Nazareth inscription. This dates to the reign of Claudius, somewhere between AD 41 and AD 54. In the Nazareth inscription, we read an edict of Caesar, the emperor, where it says, "It is my decision concerning graves and tombs that these remain undisturbed forever." There's no touching these graves. "If someone does do this, I wish that violator to suffer capital punishment under the title of tomb breaker." Well, this fits precisely with what we read in Matthew 28, where Matthew says that the guard at Jesus' tomb was paid off to lie, to say that the body of Jesus was stolen. And consequently, if this was the story that was surrounding, as Matthew claims, this would mean that the entire fear and pandemonium of Jesus being risen from the dead would have been spreading through Judea and the Mediterranean world all the way to Rome. Christianity had made it to Rome by AD 64, according to Tacitus. And so this means that this movement was exploding, so much so that it warranted an imperial edict by Emperor Claudius to say that you can't rob tombs anymore. This isn't a knockdown argument, but it is quite interesting that we have this coming out of the blue at this period in history when the Christian movement was exploding.